It's the middle of November. It's quite cold. We've already had a couple of snows, but they melted. The garden's tired. It's going to sleep for the winter. And I am reporting, as promised, on my garden season 2023, a follow-up report that I promised when I gave my report on garden 2022. As you can see, the plants have died and gone to seed. These are the tomato plants. Pull them up, take the sports off, and chop them up into the garden. There's my garden over here. You can see there are collard greens that are still green, and there's a powder box over here next to it that has parsley that's still green, and I will eat them maybe even into December because they stay green and edible even if they're covered with snow. So I will continue my report a little later. This is my introduction. The garden is in the process of going to sleep for the winter. This is a follow-up report that I promised from the report I did on my garden 2022. Now this is the report then on garden season 2023. Just a little overview. I used to garden on a ranch that had a lot of acreage. I could just grow anything I wanted, but I moved here to town and I live at the base of a mountain, Mount Sentinel. It's my little lot in town is actually on an ancient lake bed, Ancient Glacial Lake Missoula. So there's a lot of pebble in the soil. And the soil's a little different than it was at the ranch. So I can't grow the same things, the same great variety as I could at the ranch. So that's my overview. So I have to think about what does best, and also I reconsidered what is most important to me in my diet, my health, and my budget. What makes the most use of those purposes. And so I've learned from gardening over the years in this small lot in town what I really want to focus on. My backyard is surrounded by a cedar fence, 6 foot tall, keeps the deer out. The main part of my gardening is about 16 foot by 24 foot, but then I have some garden boxes as well. So what does best in my garden and what helps my food needs the most and my budget needs the most? That's what I've learned this year. Like last year, I had to leave for a while and had a family member water the garden, and the collard greens that grow freely and grow themselves without being planted now in my garden. Very happy with the conditions here. Want to choke out the other vegetables. So since I was gone, that happened a bit. And this year I was here all growing season, was able to keep that in check. I have to say something about the collard greens and the parsley. Those are plants that like it here, do well here, and propagate themselves. I really don't have to work hard to grow them. They come up, they show up all over the place. where the soil is garden soil. What I do have to do is make sure they don't take over the other vegetables that I plant. So let's see, I try to amend the soil, keep the soil in good condition by running 2 compost piles. One's a current pile with the greens from the kitchen scraps and the leaves and the grass cuttings and the old garden plants and the little twigs. I compost that. Then when it's full, I put a black tarp over it, let it cook, water it, turn the soil over it, let it cook, and work on the other compost pile, which then I call my current compost pile. When the compost soil is ready, I take a great type of sieve, a metal sieve type thing that I made, and put it over the wheelbarrow, and I sift the compost through that, and then sprinkle it on the garden in March, work it into the top of the soil. I keep a logbook. It helps me know when I want to plant, how I want to plant, where I want to plant, what the timing should be for planting, how the harvest was, and such. Notes that help me be a better gardener. I recommend using a logbook for gardening. So, what's in my garden? What are the most important things to me to grow in this garden? There are 4 really most important things, and that's my blue, purple potatoes. They're either blue or purple. I don't know what to call them, but they're an interesting dark hue of that sort. A very healthy version of potatoes. So I want to grow them. I want to grow cabbage. I can even use the cabbage if they don't bolt very well. They're great. They store great, and they're great kind of food to have in your diet. Very staple kind of food. And in apples, I have 3 trees in the front yard, and it attracts the deer, so I use the deer manure to supplement my compost pile and make it even better. So I collect the deer manure, and that's part of the compost process I use as well. Lots of apples. Apples are very important to my diet. So I grow probably 1,000 of them every other year with the 2 semi-dwarf plants, and then I have a Macintosh tree, which is right now needs to be protected from the Scotch pine, which shades it a bit. And then I have so it's the potatoes, the cabbages, the apples, and then the leafy greens. The leafy greens that I grow in the greenhouse, versions of various varieties of leaf lettuce, spinach, mustard greens. So yeah, and then I do plant a flower, nasturtiums. They seem to help with keeping pests perhaps out of the garden. Oh, I'm not sure what pests. They just seem to help accompany the garden well, and I can eat the leaves and the flowers and the stems. I did one last year, not this season, but last season, plant nasturtiums in the greenhouse along with the greens, and those nasturtiums just loved it in there, and it ended up being a nasturtium forest. It was kind of funny. So I learned, I just plant 1 or 2 nasturtiums in the greenhouse, but put the other nasturtiums in around the edges of the garden. Also, onions are important. So along with those 5 things, I like to also grow on my garden peas and carrots. Carrots are really important to me too. Zucchini, Cucumbers and tomatoes I grow in large pots outside of the garden because I don't have a big lot which to grow my food. And they do well in big pots. So I get a lot of those cucumbers and tomatoes. Now, because my garden is small, I have to make use of pots as well. My yard is on the north side of my house, so I have to put my garden on the north side of my backyard. That way it gets the most sun. And I do plant the potatoes on the north side of the garden because they grow so high I don't want them to shade the other vegetables. I also grow rhubarb in the backyard and gooseberries in the front yard. The deer like the gooseberry leaves and the gooseberries, but I still get gooseberries from them. I'm glad to have the deer in my yard. They're my friends, and they help me fertilize my garden. They're fun to watch. They like to eat sunflower seeds from the bird feeder, but I've raised the bird feeder up a little bit too high for them to reach. Nevertheless, they come to the yard. They like to sleep in the yard sometimes, nest on the pine needles. They do get a little scraps from below the bird feeder, and they like the apples. I do have a sheep wire fence around my semi-dwarf trees in the front yard to keep the deer out. They like to feed on the lower leaves and twigs of the apple trees, which is okay, but I just keep them out while the apples are growing, and then after I've harvested the apples and the apples that I don't use that have fallen, I open up the gate to the fence and let the deer in, and they enjoy those apples. Let's see what else. So I store potatoes and carrots and apples and onions in my garage where the temperature doesn't get too cold during the storage season, because the house has some heat radiating from it into the garage, just enough to keep, if there's a deep freeze, like down to zero, the apples and carrots and the onions will still be okay. So that about wraps up my report from my 2023 garden. That I promised that I would follow up with the 22 garden, so this is it. I guess my last words would be, I highly recommend having garden skills. I'm not an expert, but I do know somewhat about gardening. I've been trying to educate myself. I think the reason it's important to have gardening skills is because it can help us be self-sufficient, especially if there's a break in the transportation of food or in the supply of food. It helps with the budget. It helps you have food that you know is not tainted with pesticides that you may not want or herbicides you may not want. It helps you know you can grow, you can eat organically. It helps your budget a lot during the harvest season for quite a few months. At least for me it does. And also, there's a lot of satisfaction from being self-sufficient. And I think the last thing I want to say about gardening is that it's wonderful to get outdoors. It's good for the soul. It's good to get your hands in the soil and be close to the plant life. It's good to feel grateful for what you can grow yourself and for Mother Nature. And it's good to get sunshine. It helps us be happy. It gives us vitamin D. So there's so many reasons to grow a garden. So in closing, the only thing I can think to add is here, I do save garden seed. I save seed from the leaf lettuces, the mustard greens, the spinach, the collard greens, the parsley, and the summer squash. So that is also another form of being self-sufficient. If you can at least save some of your seed and see if you can use it. I season the seed by when it's dry, I separate the chaff from the seed and put them in empty spice or herb bottles. Store them in the greenhouse where the cold season can affect the seeds so that they can hopefully grow new plants when you plant them. So, okay, I've finally wrapped up my report, I think. I can't think of anything else to add for this year. So I made good on my promise that I would give a follow-up, and this is it. So happy gardening and good luck. I just want to show the bricks that I have incorporated next to the planter boxes. It helps keep them warm and stabilize the temperature when it gets too cold. I have water pools here also to help with the greenhouse conditions. I thought I better show that too. Here's the lettuce crop that I planted in September, and it is about done for because it's the middle of November, and that's what's left. So I thought I better show that too.